Welcome to Humanity, the epicenter of ideas surrounding transformative change that will revolutionize the way our world interacts with technology.
Today, we're going to be discussing the balancing product and technology leadership. I'm Kevin Castle, and welcome to the Humanity Podcast, where we inform and empower the public through powerful dialogue with IT visionaries. Joining me today is Todd Tita, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Atom Data Solutions. Todd will discuss how he balances his priorities and expertise as both the Chief Product and Technology Officer. Some background about Todd. Todd leverages over 2 decades of experience in technology and product innovation in his role, where he is directly responsible for driving product development and tech innovation for the nation's premier property database, as well as building teams to scale the business. Todd, welcome to the Humanity Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin.
One of the things that I wanted to start off with, Todd, was just to get a little bit deeper to understand about your current role, but also what led to that role, because it's not a common thing for people to see someone wearing both of those hats in their role.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it is a little bit unique, and it's somewhat of a circumstance of the type of business we're in. But the history is I started my career in consulting, technology consulting, in the late 90s with some of the big 5 firms. So very quickly had a balance of business and technology, and had an opportunity to see P&L aspects of a business, the expense side of technology, how those come together, and from there, I went down a path of entrepreneurship, and into our space, which is data and analytics primarily within the real estate world. And I've been in that for about 20 years now. The initial roles were heavily technology focused, solution delivery for clients. The entrepreneurship path I went down was a services business.
Okay.
And many of my clients were in this space. So had the lucky opportunity to actually grow kind of within the space with a lot of the key companies that were growing up in and around the Orange County area. Companies like what at the time was First American or Transamerica, Fidelity, you might know that name. A lot of really large scale players in the Orange County area were clients of mine. And I got to see a pretty good purview of their entire business by being in the services side as a consultant. And then from there moved into the call it in-house side, if you will, of some of those clients. And since then have run technology, professional services pieces, consumer products pieces, and in a variety of different roles within large data and analytics companies. And then with Atom, I was able to apply both of those to what we do, so I could feed both sides of my brain, really.
Right.
The practical, execution-oriented technology leadership that's still strategic, but bring the customer perspective into the process.
And so in your given role at Atom, right? So what came first? Were you responsible for product side? I mean, given their background, I could see either one starting and then leading into the other, right? So where did you
Absolutely.
start?
Yeah, chicken or egg, right? My official role when I came in was CTO.
Okay.
But I did run our consumer products business as well. So corporate consumer website called Realty Track and a couple other website assets. I ran those as a GM, in addition to the enterprise chief technology officer. So it was sort of a natural evolution when we functionalized our product orgs that I would take on the product role, chief product officer role, in addition to my CTO role.
Makes sense. Okay, makes sense. And this is one of the things that you and I have discussed previously was, in Southern California, right? In terms of IT spend that's on the profit generating side versus cost center side, there tends to be a different slant than there might be in, say, the Bay Area or Manhattan, right? It's a little bit different, right? So I'm curious to see your thoughts on, is this a unique role given the fact that you guys are on the product creation side and that you're driving technology that's going to really, determine the features, functionality that's going to gain revenue share and capture more market share?
Yeah, I'd say so. If you look at our spend profile on technology, probably 80% of it is product and revenue generating. The other 20 is supportive technology, end user computing, LAN WAN office type of expenses, which you might historically call traditional IT.
Right.
So a big chunk of our technology spend is in product. So that's what I say. It's a little unique in the sense that our company is a software and data product company. I don't think if we were, say, an operational business or a service business or something that maybe has a flipped spend, 20/80, that the role makes as much sense for my background. That's where maybe a traditional CIO type of background with a supportive, maybe a software or a data lead supporting that CIO makes more sense. But for us, it works. We're much more heavily geared towards product technology.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. So I guess, so how do you approach the dual roles, right, in your current, like what are some pros, what are some cons? I imagine there's
Sure.
probably both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think if we just even think about the way my title is officially laid out, Chief Product and Technology, as opposed to Technology and Product, kind of connotes where I come from. I lead with the customer, actually, our end user, whatever our persona is that we're maybe solving for at that point in time, and their use case. So that's why it's very intentional that product is leading, right? Product and customer being heavily aligned. And that's how I essentially manage internally. Bringing a customer voice into everything we're doing innovation-wise, our investments, where we put our bets and move chips towards. And then the technology I view as supportive of that, but with a really heavy architecture and strategy viewpoint. So how can technology increase leverage within our customer relationships? How can it grow scale for the business and not become a cost center, to your point?
Sure. Okay.
Or I should say just a cost center. It's always going to be a cost center, but I view it as it's a critical part of our business.
Okay. And so what are some interesting things that you guys are doing right now? I know this is a very busy time in real estate technology.
Yeah.
So what are some of the hot initiatives you guys are focused on these days?
Sure. Yeah, we've spent a lot of time over the last 5 years really building out our data offerings. So we collect a little bit about the business as we collect and curate about 50 different data sets, public, private, collected data sets that inform our users about the real estate market primarily, but across 4 major industries. Real estate being obvious, mortgage, insurance, particularly PNC, property and casualty, and then marketing. A lot of our data gets used for marketing use cases out there in the industry. So, excuse me, we've spent a lot of time building out the breadth and depth of our data offerings, and then also probably the other half of our innovation has been around consumption. So thinking about how clients consume data differently than maybe they had historically. And the analogy I always give is if you think about Netflix starting as a delivery company, they didn't create content, right? Whereas now they're one of the largest content producers in the world, but they kill it on consumption and delivery too. They do really, they have the world class. They're on every platform. They meet consumers where they are consuming. And that's what we've taken the approach of is we have a lot of great content. Maybe in the reverse order, we focused on content and traditional delivery, and now we're innovating on consumption and delivery of that content. So it's those are probably the 2 main areas, including all the requisite buzzwords around data platforms and data science and cloud data and data cloud, and you name all the different appetites or types of consumption that could play there. We're doing something in all of those.
Okay.
And then the last piece is just we have a nascent AI ML capability, primarily around data processing, but we're in the midst of bringing that to market with client product as well, because we see some interesting use cases there.
I see. Okay. And so tell me what that. So I got 2 questions. One is oriented towards a next level understanding of what is the transformation you're talking about in terms of what the Netflix has done, right, from a delivery side to consumer content creation and continue on a new form of delivery. And then the other thing is, how did you guys start to make that change internally, right? And how did that play out?
Yeah, let me try the second one
Okay.
first because it's a simpler story. What we were noticing in our process, let me frame it a little bit. Historically, the data industry, information industry, has delivered data to clients first in old school paper form, and then moved to maybe an electronic form via a CD, and then FTP, a variety of different, what I call disconnected deliveries, where you hand the data over to the customer and they do what they will with it, but you have no insight into what they're doing with it or how to help them use it. And you're not connected enough to them. That's how we have historically, my industry, the real estate data industry, has done things. Data gets essentially handed off to the clients. They may or may not come back with questions. And there's an adoption issue that comes out of that. We saw that pattern coming probably about 2016, where there was going to be a change in cloud-based delivery. And what I mean by that is just simply delivering that data in a managed service way where customers can actually just use our platforms, just use our tools and technologies to access the data that we manage with them or for them, in the case of some of our newer initiatives. And it really gets our clients out of the data management business themselves, when that's what we're good at. We want to manage your data with you, our data for you, and then your data with it. And we've built a number of processes to make that easier, cheaper, faster, etc. And it allows our clients to just focus on what they're good at, which is gleaning insight from the data as it relates to their business, which we could never be the experts in, because we're not in their business every day.
Right.
So long story short, we saw that trend coming. We see you've got names like Snowflake and Redshift and Firebolt and all these different cloud-based delivery mechanisms. So we looked at it as we want to be an ecosystem within that ecosystem for our delivery. So that was really the move.
Okay.
Back to the first question around what does that mean from say what Netflix is doing. Netflix turns and applies that connected delivery to recommendations and suggestions and a content strategy that they follow. We have turned it into making it much easier for our customers to use our data. We focused there. Obviously, a lot of exhaust information coming off of that usage, a lot of metadata that we see on patterns and where questions are being asked of the data. But we're mostly focused on making it easier for our customers, to consume it.
Okay.
Long tail maybe to think about, what new content can come out of that, but it's not something we're focused on today.
Gotcha. And it's funny now. This might be a little bit embarrassing to admit, but I remember when Netflix came out and they had this streaming service and they had this awkward Silverlight plugin. If you remember,
Yes, I do.
I remember thinking, why would anybody want to sit in front of a computer and watch a movie, right? When you just spent all this money on a home entertainment system, right? So
Right.
Similar to that, right? I don't know how many customers were actually asking for it back then versus Netflix saw kind of what the future held and made a proactive stance to get in front of it, right? So I guess, how often do you take a similar stance in terms of doing things that you think will be beneficial versus responding to what they're asking for?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'd say historically our space has been a laggard in adopting and driving new technology. That's just the reality of real estate. We've talked about that, and we've talked about other industries that are sort of behind the adoption curve. And so we're ending up having to push the envelope a little bit. I wouldn't call us bleeding edge by any means, but we definitely are bringing new thinking to our space. specific space. Um, but I'd say the majority of our product roadmap is driven by a pretty tight collaboration with our customers.
Okay.
Whether that be purposeful and the result of a focus group or a survey or targeted conversations, or just simply, listening and then driving our roadmap off of that. It's probably a mix of those two.
Okay. I got you. Makes sense. I guess one of the other things that I thought would be worthwhile to pivot on is just, you drew out this comparison earlier in terms of where you're at with Adam, your background, and kind of how it fits to where having this dual-headed role versus traditional CIO role or technology leader, right? So I'm just curious, given what you're seeing and what you're responsibility for, I mean, are there things that you're seeing in the traditional CIO role that are aligned to where you're at, or is there a convergence kind of in the future of being that product and persona based decision making as it applies to a technology leader role?
Yeah. So I think you're asking, do I see this role expanding, being more common, maybe in the future, and there be a bit of a convergence? I think as products just become more technical in nature, whether that be a direct data product like what we do, or just any sort of service that's tech enabled or data enabled, I think having the skill sets of a traditional CIO role are very valuable at that table where you're making decisions around roadmap. I've found personally, for me, I rely on my technical background pretty heavily in influencing the business, and I'm looked to for that in a large way, right? Given my dual role. I don't necessarily think every business is going to have this scenario in the future, but I just think as general products and services become more tech enabled or data enabled, it'll be a valuable skill and an opportunity for technology leaders to really move into other parts of the business. I think about, in the early 2000s when the movement was the CIO as a direct report of a CEO, and that was a bit controversial. And now you often wouldn't think twice about that.
Right.
I won't say every company operates that way, but it's much more common than it was in, say, the late 90s and early 2000s when I first started my career. The CIO was an extension of a CFO or a COO generally back then, and it grew in stature through the 2000s and into maybe early 2010. And it's been a little stagnant. The CIO role has been a little stagnant as analytics took over and data and digital officers took over as a much more strategic role. But I do believe CIOs can do all of that, actually. A lot of chief digital officers grew out of some sort of technical role. A lot of data science folks grew out of technology roles, not traditional business role. So I think it's certainly possible that there's some convergence and folks that are technology based can make that migration.
And I guess you brought up something talking about that change in the early 2000s of the CIO role and reporting structure, right? And what we've seen since March this last year with things being shut down, the impact of COVID to industries. How do you view the role of the technology leader changing for most enterprises, at least with the folks in your peer groups and who you interact with?
Sure. Yeah, great question. Because I will say I've relied more on my CIO background, which I've done that in the past as well, a pure play CIO role. I've relied on that more in the last 6 months than I did in the prior 5 years, frankly, right? So end user enablement, technologies, collaboration, how can technology actually empower a remote workforce, things we've talked about, in other forums. I think that's adding value or driving value out of a CIO that maybe wasn't as top of mind for most companies and CEOs as recently as earlier this year. So yeah, I definitely see an acceleration factor enablement, certainly enablement technologies, and then culture. How do you preserve culture, and how does technology not, I guess, for lack of a better term, ruin culture, and in a negative way. So the ethical, culture aspects of things.
Right, right. Well, so I guess it's a big struggle for everybody right now, is right. How do you maintain your company and organization's culture during a time where people are only communicating through technical means? That's going to be an ongoing challenge probably for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
But I guess on the topic of the role that us as technology leaders and innovators in this industry, what are some things that as you've seen, you kind of put those skills back on after 5 years of really it's been on the back burner? What are some areas of innovation that you think that other technology leaders could focus on and kind of build on the momentum that we've seen where organizations have really relied on them to be able to save them through these difficult times in terms of
Sure.
the fabric of business operation?
Yeah, maybe a general answer first, and then we can kind of narrow down to what I see happening in my world, specifically. I mean, I think it's all about that remote workforce enablement is thinking out a year or two where different business processes can be remote. The more you can enable that, the more valuable your technology becomes to your business. And that's what I spend a lot of time doing, is thinking out a year or two on where we need to be, because some of these things take a year or two to get it put in place, if not longer. And so I'd say think out to the future. Everybody's got a perspective on what return to the office means. So don't want to go down the rabbit hole of varying philosophies there, but we certainly think we got to enable whatever our employees need, whether that's work from home or work in the office, and make sure that's seamless. And I can tell you one area that I lose sleep over a little bit, and we're starting to spend time on and money, is security in the home.
Yeah.
Right? How do you secure what now are proliferated devices connecting to our corporate network?
Right.
We're starting to think about, dropping boxes into everybody's homes. That's a personal VPN appliance, and making sure all of their home computers are secured, since it's the N plus factor of all the different devices inside of a house. The adage is, if you've been with one person, you've been with everybody they've been with. That's now what's happening in technology and the connection to the office. So we need to make sure we're protecting, on the edge, and we're thinking about that pretty heavily.
Right. It's interesting you bring that up. I mean, that seems such an obvious, glaring, major risk. I'm surprised I haven't heard that more of the dialogue out there, right?
Yeah.
In terms of people looking at risk. I mean, maybe there's other major risks that are glaring on the news that are kind of captivating more attention, but it is one of those things that I could see as to be a major challenge, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely.
have you heard of any incidents along that so far? I mean, because it just seems like such an easy issue to start to proliferate.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I don't track it very closely, so that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. But yeah, we're trying to be proactive about it, because it is obvious. Somewhere along the lines, your daughter's school computer that doesn't have the best AV in the world is going to get compromised, and then that's going to trickle its way into your work network somehow. So that might be me projecting personally, because now kids are on every darn site that there is. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's just it is a hole that we have to plug.
I got you. Okay. I guess, Todd, one of the other things I was interested to talk about with you is, because you spent so much time in this in the industry, right, of real estate technology. I'm just curious to understand where are things at, what's kind of the state, and what are some things that are really intriguing that you're watching go on. And
Sure. Yeah, I mean, but the backdrop for the audience is that real estate has historically been behind on technology adoption. Pretty much all aspects of real estate, from the actual transaction to how people shop to how people own a home to commercial. It's just been behind other industries that are much more tech enabled. But that started to change, call it around 2013, 2014, as the housing market really recovered. There was a lot more interest from investors in what I'll call real estate tech or property tech, that you started seeing increased investment, you started seeing increased innovation, up to now, up to this year. It's last year was a record year of investment in the space. So you're now starting to see some of the innovations come out of that, be it new data, types of opportunity, smart buildings, smart IoT type of solutions. I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on real estate tech as an innovation center. New business models entirely. You think about like Opendoor, which is what's called an iBuyer,
Okay.
where you can sell your home instantly to them as a buyer, and they'll give you a number, they'll buy it, and then they'll turn around and sell it into the market. So the pain point that's solving is somebody trying to sell their house, not wanting to show it,
Right.
or not wanting to do rehab, and they take on all that risk. So huge innovation there in terms of business model and some of the technology applications to that. Interestingly, what COVID has done is accelerated a lot of these business models. Now you're seeing pretty much every real estate broker out there, come up with their corresponding Opendoor, style iBuyer model. Zillow is a huge player in the space. Redfin has a program for it. And I think that is going to get accelerated because of what's happening with COVID. It's a cleaner, easier way to sell your house. You might take a little bit of a discount for it, but you don't have people coming around your house and having to show it and prep it.
What's the typical discount we're looking at with like Opendoor? What, versus?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, it's pretty hard to kind of narrow down exactly what they're targeting, but we believe in the high 80% range of retail value is what most of the iBuyers are targeting. And that's net of all fees, because you pay a pretty hefty fee for this. But let's say it's 89 cents on the dollar to what you would pay if you went and put your house on the market. You'd pay a 6%, 5-6% commission and a bunch of fees. You might end up with 93 cents on the dollar.
Add your time into that too, which is part of the calculation, right?
Yeah. So this business model is really interesting to us. We're kind of watching it. Zillow announced this week that they're becoming, or expanding, I should say, their iBuyer program to actually have full-time agents working for them. That's never been done before. Zillow's been sort of the advocate of the consumer for years. And now they're looking at having in-house staff running this program. So that's a pretty significant move that could disrupt what happens with the rest of the industry. So just a couple, small things recently that we're keeping an eye on. I do think this space is getting compressed in terms of innovation. And over the next couple of years, you're going to see some pretty significant shifts in it. Even as basic as showings, you think about you've bought and sold homes, you actually physically went to the house you wanted to buy, right? Now that's it's not as easy.
Right.
A lot of sellers are very hesitant to have people in their homes, but it's not as necessary either, because 3D tours, virtual walkthroughs, all connected. Again, kind of back to that connected technology, is enabling that to be possible. So those are probably the big ones, just centered around the buying and shopping habits of consumers and sellers, buyers and sellers.
Mm-hmm. And does the end consumer, right? Because I get it makes sense, like technology to fill these gaps and to be able to quickly sell, there's an ease along the way, right? In terms of the end customer wanting to do that, and I know there's apps where you can buy a car and ship it and you never have to test drive, I guess, and so we're seeing that model follow through on the car buying side, right?
Right.
Do you view that to be that may be a preferred path for most consumers?
I won't go as far as say most consumers. The surveys that have been is pre-COVID, but
Yeah.
you'll see out there say somewhere between 15 and 20%
Okay.
of consumers are comfortable buying a home sight unseen. That's actually a big number.
That's bigger than what I would have thought. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge number. That's a million well over a million homes a year that could sell that way. And so you don't need a lot of market share to make that happen. Uh, do I think that becomes 100%? Probably not. I mean, I don't. I personally would probably not do that. Maybe an investment home, but my own home, unlikely.
Yeah.
But you don't have to believe that could happen to believe that the entire process still gets shifted upside down. Showings, digital mortgage. We've talked about
Mhm.
mortgages today. You don't even go in person to sign those anymore. Whereas, with the exception of one piece of paper that still requires a wet signature. So for the most part, the mortgage process is now digitized or soon to be. The showing process, with the exception of maybe that final showing. So can you go look at 50 homes virtually, whereas before you could only tour 3 or 4 homes in a day?
Right. That's
Um,
right.
that there's a huge change in the economy just from that. Whether the last showing is in person or not is sort of beside the point. So
That's a
um,
good point. And given the state of the housing market, by the time that it may be sold on your way to go look at it the first time, right? So,
that's right. That's right. Especially today.
yeah,
Jeez. Yeah, you're exactly right.
the virtual would actually give you an edge.
Right.
All right. So I guess one of the finishing questions that I had for you, Todd, was around the concept of, you mentioned real estate technologies as being a little bit behind than maybe some other industries. How does a technology leader start to influence that change, right? We see COVID as kind of exponential impact to people investing and innovating and kind of trusting their technology leadership roles. Um, what are some things that another technology leader should think about and do to really try to help their industry move up or their enterprise move up in terms of innovation?
Yeah. So when it comes to innovation, I think you can do it on the product or expense side, the operational side, like we were talking about earlier. And I think it all comes down to focus on the outcome, not on the actual details of what you're trying to get done. So use the security example I gave earlier about home security. If I went to my board and said, hey, I need to spend, call it 100 grand on making sure everybody has a device in their house that protects them from security issues, that won't resonate as much as me saying we could lose $5 million in a phishing attempt from financial fraud tomorrow. And by the way, here's plenty of examples of that happening. And that conversation around outcomes, I found, when you're talking to anybody that doesn't really understand the technology that's behind something, is critical. That be that product or a business technology spend. And so, the first thing I'd say is, focus on the outcome, not the means to get there. And then I use the term inside baseball a lot. I think a lot of technologists, including myself, fall into the habit of speaking with a lot of acronyms, speaking with a lot of inside baseball, where most people don't live and breathe this every day. So to the extent you can avoid that and communicate it in a way that's both back to the outcome based, but just simple,
Yeah.
is really critical. And yeah, I mean, those are probably the 2 biggest tips that I'd have, and what's worked for me through my career.
Okay. All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Good advice, Todd. All right,
Mhm.
Todd. Well, that's all the time for the show. And I thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I will put your contact information in the show notes if anybody has interest to understand more about Adam as it pertains to your guys' impact in the real estate services space. But other than that, I just want to thank you for joining and thank you for the listeners for listening in today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to the listeners.
Thanks, Todd.